Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to make sure that everyone can chat with us, setting it up. We can chat with all the people. If you're coming on, welcome. My name is Akib Yakubu. I'm Chief of Staff of Women's March. Thanks for joining us tonight on what day of the what day in the clock of the world is it right now? Fascism. Uh, happy Tuesday, y'all. It's good to be with you. Thank you so much for hopping on. Where the numbers are climbing. We had about 9,000 people who said they're going to join us tonight. We're grateful for you all to be here. Drop in the chat where you're coming in from. Let us know your city and state. Again, my name is Akib Yakub. I'm Chief of Staff of Women's March. We're grateful for you to join us tonight for this next edition on digital defenders, diving into security culture and particularly digital security and info security. We'll define what that is. We're going to talk a little bit more about it. I will talk about how we can safeguard and protect our movements and each other moving forward. It is my tremendous pleasure to introduce Dr. Leslie Hahner and Dr. Heather Woods, who, like every month, lead us through this process of digital defenders, bringing really good, tangible, usable skills to all of you, right? So welcome. We'll get it started. Let's give it maybe a minute more to go. I know that we might see lots of questions about what's happening on June 14th, where the clowns coming at, what we're doing about Trump's military parade. We promise some emails are coming out to all of you by tomorrow with more information on the 14th. And we will get all of that to you very soon. But on that note, I think we don't have critical mass because the numbers are still climbing rapidly, but I'll turn it over to Dr. Hahner and Dr. Woods to jump into all the things. Yeah?
Welcome, y'all. We are so excited to have you here. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, right? And move us into the next part of the presentation. So welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Leslie Hahner, and tonight I am joined by Dr. Heather Suzanne Woods. We are extremely grateful to the Women's March for hosting us tonight and allowing us the time and opportunity to discuss with you different information security measures that you can take to protect yourself. Tonight, we'll be talking about information security as a changing landscape. And our goal is to give you not just a stronger understanding of that landscape, but more specifically, practical tools that you can use to create stronger data barriers around your information. My name is Dr. Leslie Ann Hahner. I am a researcher of disinformation and community resilience, and my particular expertise lies in how visual messages impact an audience and solicit their affective connections a little bit more. My colleague is Dr. Heather Suzanne Woods, I will now allow to introduce herself.
Hey y'all, so excited for you to be here. Thanks for taking the time. We know that you all are so busy, but this is such an important topic we're excited to chat about. My name is Dr. Heather Suzanne Woods. I'm a communication and technology expert with a background in platforms and digital and emergent technology. I'm also a strategy advisor and a community resilience facilitator. So this work is right up my alley, and I'm so excited to partner with Dr. Hahner, the Women's March, and all of y'all today. Thank you.
Well, welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for taking time out of a busy week to talk about how you can protect yourself online, and more importantly, how we can continue to support a community of resistance to the authoritarian actions we see unfolding in front of us. This month's version of Digital Defenders is focused on information security. We want you to understand and learn how to protect yourself and your community within this current online climate and digital space. Today's training is going to give you a quick and dirty overview of information security and best practices. We will keep it sort of high level at this point. If you want future trainings that dig deeper into information security, that's something that we can consider. We also want you to know that we've discussed in the past, right, how individuals can fight against misinformation and disinformation. We've discussed things like how community and friendship can help us overcome the malaise of the resistance. And today we want you to think about more specifically how you can add layers of protection to your information security game. We'll be building on the frameworks that we've discussed in previous months in ways that are focused on allowing you to advance your own advocacy. We know that social media can be a place for good, a medium for connection, and a means of uniting people around shared digital community and digital struggle. But we can't do it alone, and that's where you come in. You are important to building community, to sustaining this practice in the fight, and to all of the different actions that are necessary. One big takeaway is that you cannot easily opt out of these digital surveillance systems. So it's important that you learn how to navigate opting in and opting out, as well as reducing your overall risk. So as we move forward, let's check in using the chat. What is one way you are protecting yourself online right now? Drop into the chat what is one way you are protecting yourself online right now. Right, so some people are not using their full name, they're using a VPN, they're setting their profiles to private. All of these are great security measures. Who else has thoughts here? Using Signal for text, great. Not responding to trolls, always a good plan. VPN, using DuckDuckGo, not putting my location into a chat like this. That's funny. And then using Signal, email relay through Firefox, awesome. Proton Mail, I haven't seen that one in a while, but I love it. Love to see it. DuckDuckGo and Signal, antivirus with VPN, wonderful. Right, awesome. Okay, so I already see some wonderful steps that each of you are taking to secure your information and to put barriers around your data. This is awesome. My hope is that we will give you even more tools by the end of the night to better understand how to add layers of protection to your information security game.
Leslie, I'm so sorry. Can I just jump in really quickly? I just want to remind everyone to please just use the Q&A box for questions and not comments. We really appreciate it so that it doesn't get clogged up. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Our purpose tonight is to learn more specifics about information security. Most generally, we're learning how to protect yourself online with some very basic digital security measures. We know that you can learn about threats to democracy online and how platforms participate in and sometimes incentivize anti-democratic practices like data collection and surveillance. We want to highlight the current information and digital landscape so you can understand the risks and threats that are used in your connected tools, as well as identify tools and practices to keep yourself and your community safe. Our plan for tonight will be to move forward in 3 parts. The first part will be understanding the current information security landscape and how platforms are using your data. The second point will discuss entry points to information security, including some basic measures of protection, as well as our third step would be how to step up your game. Our biggest takeaway for all of our trainings is that your voice matters. At some level, you know this, right? You're here because you know the power that digital collectives can have. And if we can protect our information better online, we will have a stronger voice with which to advocate in the public sphere. Our takeaway for tonight's class, however, is a little bit more specific. Our takeaway for tonight is that we want you to lean into layers of protection over perfection. We cannot remove our sort of risks that we take online, but we can instill and use a number of layers of protection that allow us to achieve a stronger information security presence online. Tonight, we hope that we'll achieve several different learning outcomes. First, we want you to understand why and how groups like the alt-right and white supremacist collectives are using fear appeals to radicalize our neighbors and loved ones, spread false information, and divide us using that fear-mongering. We want you to learn how communication and advocacy practices are influenced by the websites, platforms, and other digital tools that we use. We want you to learn how communication and advocacy practices are influenced by those websites and platforms and how they collect information about you, even when you haven't opted in to that data collection. We also want you to understand the evolving nature of information security and the current situations to watch, as well as proactive steps you can take to protect yourself. And finally, we hope that all of us in this space will apply our knowledge to help take back our digital space. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heather Woods, who will talk with us about information security and digital advocacy.
Okay, thanks for that, Dr. Hahner. Once again, thanks for being here, everyone. We're really excited to talk about some digital advocacy basics. I want to mention that although our digital defense trainings that we've done over a period of time, they do sort of connect to one another, and they build on each other. You do not need to have attended the former webinars in order to get something out of this experience. So don't worry if this is your first time here. This is your first time here, welcome. And we'll cover the things that you need to know while also inviting you to go back and look at some of the other webinars that we've done if this type of approach makes sense to you. And those are available, I believe, on YouTube. Okay, so let's get sort of caught up on where we sort of start, where we sort of ground our conversation. And that is to affirm what Dr. Hahner said. You know, digital media is a lot, it's in many ways sort of the backbone of much of our advocacy. The fact that we're meeting in this space, the fact that you probably learned about some information about this webinar is an indication that you have been engaging in digital advocacy. And so we know that it's a really important and powerful tool for communication. But not only is it an important tool for political communication, it's important for creating a digital collective. So I want to shout out to the fact that we have over 1,000 people on the chat right now engaging in a powerful action to make our individual experiences online safer, but also our collective experiences online safer, because that is something that we're going to talk a lot about today. Although we're going to make some recommendations about individual things that you can do, we are the people who keep us safe. We do this collectively. And so what you can do to protect yourself is also what you can do to protect others. So we're creating a digital collective, and we're doing it at a place where we know that misinformation and hatred and violence can spread and circulate quickly. If you've been with us before, you know that we sort of have talked about how platforms do incentivize volatility, attention, and visibility. So it doesn't matter if something is the truth for it to scale really quickly. In our last section, we talked about how algorithms, which are those mathematical tools that produce our social media, prioritize engagement and attention, because that's what keeps eyes on social media. So much of those platforms actually incentivize the spreading of disinformation because it is more sensational. This is meant to divide us, but we're not going to let that happen. And so what we'll do today is talk about ways to keep ourselves safe online, in real life, and in the struggle for justice. As our society becomes more digital, more information is collected about us. That information is personal, even intimate, but it's not always private. And in fact, we're going to recommend that you just assume much of what you do online is public. So in the past, we've shown you how to turn parts of the digital media that divide us into tools that bring us together. But sometimes these tools can be used against us, particularly if we are engaged in justice work, like online organizing and protests. You need a strategy given this situation, and we take this into account. So we're going to share with you 4 key takeaways from sort of our research, our over 30 or 40 years collective experience in this space on the next slide. There are 4 key takeaways here. The first is that most tools that we use online are not our own, which means we're playing somebody else's game, and we have to be aware of the rules of that game. The second thing that we're going to talk more about is that data is everywhere, and it's difficult to exist outside of that space. And that is going to change the rules of the game as well. Infosec, which is sort of the shortened version of information security, is a networked and collective practice. So what you do influences what others do, and the opposite is also true. And because one of our key takeaways overall is that we want you to think about adding layers of protection over time, we want you to think about information security as an ongoing practice that we have to practice over time. So let's get into this first takeaway. First, most of these tools are just not ours to control. We are entering into what many scholars and activists and human rights watchers have been looking into and calling a neo-oligarchy. Because platforms have just incredible opportunities to regulate and determine what we see. And they have incredible power to control speech and to shift the online space. So because we don't own these platforms, we're largely playing by their rules. And they can change them whenever and however they want to. And we know that this is happening already because we've noticed how some of the owners of the largest or operators, leaders of some of the largest social media have sort of already indicated that they plan to work within the sort of political ideology of the current administration. And it was quick. It was so quick when it happened. They turned around some of their policies. They removed some of the safety nets or like blocks or checking apparatuses, the ability to go in and safeguard protected populations. And it happened really quickly. And so because of that, because we don't own these platforms, but we use them in a lot of different ways, we have to be adaptable to the moment, and we have to be constantly reminded that we don't own these spaces and we're playing by their rules. Now, I noticed that some of you indicated that you were sort of getting off of social media. You said that you were not interested in being part of these spaces at all, and I totally understand that. One of the things we're going to talk about today is that people have different risk thresholds or calculations. And so if you've decided social media is not for you, we hear you, we understand that. At the same time, we know that's a lot of where community organizing is happening. And especially in very local communities, some of these social media platforms are being used as low effort or sort of low resource ways to organize people online. So it's difficult for us to sort of tell you to totally get off social media or to not recognize that there is organizing happening on that space that's important. So how do we sort of respond to that? First, know that data collection and privacy settings change all the time. One of the things that we'll share today is that if you're not paying for a service, you are the service. And so platforms want that data for themselves, or they may be data brokers sharing your materials with other people for profit. Or it's sometimes more likely that they can be compelled to give your data up if, for instance, law enforcement or another sort of governmental organization or entity requests or demands it from them. So what that means is that we need to be careful about the information and security measures that we take online. On almost every social media site, there are choices for privacy settings. You can make some things public, you can make some things private, you can make decisions about how you connect to friends or how you've been searched, or there's various levers that you can pull. But I would argue that they change so significantly that it's almost a full-time job to keep up with those changes. And so one of the things that we'll recommend a little bit later is that you spend some time taking a good audit of the social media that you use and what privacy settings are actually available. We also know that these platforms can be hacked. And we know that there are apps that collect our data that become vulnerable to attacks. So the Federal Trade Commission itself continues to warn users that apps like Meta, Facebook, and TikTok are gathering vast amounts of data and selling that to other actors. So we just have to mind our P's and Q's online. We have to mind what we put on those spaces that we don't own. The second sort of takeaway is that we are living in a digital world, and I want to sort of do like a Madonna, and I am a digital girl. But one of the things that I recently argued in my latest book is that it's difficult to opt out of much of our technology because we exist in a world in which data is collected about us from morning to night. And sometimes we don't always have choices about what data is collected. In fact, there's actually a really interesting relationship between people who have the most power, privilege, and authority and the people who can control their data. So not everybody has the same ability to control their data or even opt out of data. And among the wealthiest and most privileged of us are able to do so, but others may not be able to as easily. There's lots of different kinds of surveillance that we want to point out today. And we want to be cautious to say that, like, not all surveillance is the absolute worst in the world. To some extent, there has to be some record keeping, there has to be some data documentation. What we're concerned about is the weaponization of that data and the weaponization of that data collection, and also to empower you to make thoughtful decisions about how you participate in surveillance. So for instance, we know that there is, at the basic governmental level, bureaucracy and record keeping for citizens in the United States, for instance, whether or not you voted and in what races you voted in, that's public, right? Some tax records are public, those sorts of things are public. And part of that's necessary to make a bureaucracy function. When we start intersecting with power and authority, that's when we start getting into some questions that we're really concerned about. So policing and law enforcement, or borders and movement control, are examples of state-based surveillance. And so if you've been traveling nationally or internationally, you might have come upon a camera that takes a picture of your face and compares it to a database. The fact that that even works and that it operates at a particular scale is an indication of the massive amounts of data that are available by government or state-based entities, and that it's functional and that they've got the tools to sort of mobilize those tools. I also want to talk a little bit about institution-based networks of data collection, surveillance, and control. So in employment, your employer probably has some data about you. If you work at a job where they either track your movement or they track when you clock in or clock out, or maybe you have a work computer or a work cell phone or a work device or something along those lines, your employer has a great deal of information about you, and they can use it in various ways. And so when you clock into work, if you are, for instance, you work through an app, for instance, they can sometimes track your movement or your space or location. So just thinking about surveillance in that way. Finance and banking is another way that surveillance exists, and that plugs into a broader economic, what we'd call an infrastructure. We don't have a ton of time to get into that today, but know that your spending habits, your finances, your access to cash and capital and credit, all of those things are connected in really detailed ways. And also healthcare. And this is a big issue in the post-Roe world. Our ability to access good healthcare that's safe, secure, and private, and is between a medical professional and the person seeking care, that's not as guaranteed as we would like right now, right? And so there's lots of different ways that, for instance, healthcare can be part of an institution-based surveillance. Another one that is not on here, but I think is important, is public services or schools, those sorts of things, like institutions that you're a part of that you share information with, they become sort of plugged into this broader surveillance network. I'm also seeing in the chat people talking about like Ring doorbells or like smart cameras or smart thermometers, etc. This is my area of expertise. My latest book was on smart homes. And it is an interesting type of surveillance because unlike the other ones, smart devices are those that we actively choose and we opt into, but with impacts that affect other people. And so if you or a neighbor installs, for instance, a camera doorbell, the ability for somebody to walk down the street absent surveillance is sort of shifted, right? But where or who owns the surveillance or who makes choices about the surveillance changes. And so we know from some studies by the EFF and others that Amazon and Ring were working with local police officers to arguably bypass the need for warrants to surveil or to gather information about individuals, because individuals who had smart cameras or doorbells could elect to give that material to police who asked about it. And so that was something that I think only recently stopped, but there was a pretty intense partnership between various state actors, institutions, and individuals. I also want you to think about if you choose to have any sort of trackers in this moment. We're going to do an audit here in a bit, but like if you have a smartwatch, or you use a particular fitness app, or you use even a maps app, thinking about things that you actively sort of opt into and being very cautious about where they store that data. Is it in the cloud off your device? Is it secured? Is it encrypted? Is it protected? Or can anyone have access to it? And we don't want to make sort of broad generalizations about different providers because they have different privacy policies. But if you're like the millions of us who sort of just click the opt-in or accept terms and conditions, now's the time to get really granular. Now's the time to look and see what is being shared. One final thing I'll share on this slide is that there are new systems being developed to sweep across these information inputs. ChatGPT, we've learned, is a good example of this, and increasing connections across these types of surveillance will provide actors with a richer, more nuanced view of you and your data. And so one of the things that we're thinking about is being cautious about what we contribute to, what information we put in the system, because we know that is being used against us. And so we know, for instance, that Women's March has been, I wouldn't say infiltrated, but people have tried to use bots and other tools to get inside of Women's March communities and divide them based on information that's been available to them in those spaces. Okay, so I've probably maybe freaked people out. Sorry about that. I promise we're going to get into the more like hands-on stuff, but I also want you all to know that this is the landscape, right? This is the place that we're in, and our goal is to not be scared, but to be prepared. And so to be prepared, we want to tell you about places where surveillance exists that you might not be thinking about. Our third takeaway is that Infosecurity is networked. This is a follow-on to the last webinar that we did, which was about collective care. But one of the things that we want to share with you is that, we like to think about privacy or security as individual or singular, but in the digital age, they should always be considered collectively, because how we act influences others. What we do or the choices that we make affect others in our network. So we do need to make choices that are right for ourselves and our particular risk or threat calculation, but we also need to take into account how they may affect others who have different levels of risk. Engaging in protest and doing social justice work will always inherently bring some form of risk, but that tolerance is individual. And it's going to be based on a number of factors, like your general risk tolerance, your status in society, whether various facets of your identity are affirmed or demonized, and in what ways, your access to resources, to community or family support, your access to money if you need it, your access to legal counsel if you need it, your responsibility to others, and other elements are all going into the sort of risk tolerance that you have. And although you might have one, other people maybe have more or less risk tolerance. So we want you to think about how your surveillance practices or participation in surveillance practices or rejection of surveillance practices might influence others. For example, when you tag a friend on a social media platform, are you opening them up to your network? Do you have different security policies or privacy policies? What if you accidentally or on purpose take a picture of someone at a protest and they're not supposed to be there, right? Or they have a higher risk, a higher level of risk, and they experience like some sort of retribution or response. Or what if you share a link with a friend and the cookies that sort of track us across the social sphere sort of contribute, add to their digital profile in that way? These are all examples of how Infosecurity is networked. And because we're so interested in this concept of community, we do want to ask a question of you, which is, how do you protect yourself and others? So we'd love if in the chat you could share, how do you protect your friends online? Okay, I'm seeing folks say being thoughtful about participation, don't post pictures of people's faces, don't tag photos, ask permission first. I think that's a good first step. Yeah. Yeah, don't tag anybody in public without their consent. Blur images. Keep profile private. Using Signal, for instance. Ooh, vet participants. Yeah, I think that's really important. Trust and verify the collective. One thing we were talking about in our pre-conversation is that we're seeing an influx of action in response to the federal and other administrative changes, which is great. We love that. We love people sort of coming together, but we're also seeing people create like bogus or fake or almost, bogus or fake actions. And so one of the things we're going to encourage you to do is like trust and verify your sources, which sounds funny from a bunch of academics, because yes, we think that you should do that. We think you should do that when you write a paper, but also when you're doing action, make sure that you vet your collective. Don't accept friend requests from strangers. Yeah. VPN, no politics on social media. Don't tag people who have different risk profiles than others. Yeah. Very good. Okay. All right. So you all are doing a really great job. I love that you've already thought about the ways that our Infosecurity is connected to others. We'll keep having this conversation, but I want to say one more thing before I transition it back over to Dr. Hahner. And this is that our final takeaway for this sort of like section before we move into the more pragmatic and practical stuff is that InfoSec is ongoing. Information security is an ongoing practice where we are going to invite you to think of this as a long-term investment. And I also want you to know that doing something is better than nothing. I think one of the things that we really hope does not happen is that you sort of check out after this section and say, too much is going on. I don't have my hands on the levers of power. I can't do anything. That's not true. We do want you to tell you where the levers of power are, though. And we want to invite you to do some things that will make your information security stronger and better given this landscape. So something is better than nothing, and baby steps make a real difference. As a long-term investment, any of the things that you can do in our sort of entry points to Infosecurity section, which is coming next, is really going to help prepare you and protect others. And we want you to be present to ongoing changes. So platforms like Meta and Facebook and Twitter/X, they change their settings in response to many variables. Rules, laws, and regulations change. Like we know that that's happening now. Just I think earlier today or maybe yesterday, I can't even keep up. There was an executive order that empowered law enforcement even more, right? So that's probably going to have some knock-on effects for surveillance and security. But also new technologies emerge that change the landscape, or maybe your own risk tolerance changes. Sometimes things happen, you become responsible for caretaking for somebody, or a particular subject position or identity that you have becomes villainized or victimized, right? Those things mean that you have to constantly be preparing to think about your information security of yourself and others moving forward. I think maybe let's do another check-in before we lock into entry points to Infosecurity. We'd love to hear, based on what you've seen so far, what concerns you about information security right now? Tracking, Doge, data breaches, returning to the US from abroad, that organizations are being infiltrated, everything. Finding a safe way to protest, yeah, retaliation. And we should be able to do this activist organizing that is a right and that is central to democracy, and do it without a fear of retribution. But I'm also seeing a lot of fear of retribution in the chat, which I'm not surprised by, and solidarity with you all. Good. Okay. Dr. Hahner, you want to take us into some more tangible recommendations?
And I also want to say, y'all, this chat has been wonderful. Y'all have been problem solving together. When we talked about varying levels of risk, some people who have very, very high levels of risk end up employing a service called Delete Me. And I believe somebody mentioned that sort of service in the chat. And it's where literally you pay this service to delete your online information. But that's typically for influencers or people who have much higher risk. So for example, I have not engaged that service, even though I know that a lot of my data has been stolen or corrupted. Okay. Let's go ahead then and engage in an activity. One of the first ways we try to enter into a better understanding of our data security is by evaluating how much of our data is out there. And so to do that, we're going to engage in a data audit. We're going to offer you two different ways to do this data audit. More generally, a data audit is when you perform a search on your personal data to see how your information is used or in what ways it is used. So the first way you can perform a data audit is to use your cell phone and evaluate how much time you're spending on different applications in your phone. So if you have an iPhone, you can open up under settings and you can open up all apps and website activity, and it will give you a lovely list of how long you're spending on different apps. And given what we've already learned in this workshop, we know that when we spend time on those apps, it's not just for our entertainment, our behaviors, our actions, our time on that app is sold to other sort of parties. And so as you think about that first audit, don't just look at the apps you're engaged in, but look at how is my information then being allocated to these different applications or places. A second kind of audit is to check the security of your information systems. One way to do this is to go through your emails over, say, the last 6 months to a year and check for security or fraud alerts. I tend to get a lot of these, and so I know that my information has been sold to a number of different places. You can then, based on those emails, evaluate how much of your information has been corrupted. And that might allow you to do certain things. Like for me, to protect my financial information, I put a security alert on my credit cards or on other spending mechanisms. If you're looking for a quicker way to check the quality of your data, the security of your information system, I won't endorse either of these websites, but Have I Been Pwned, as well as Cyber News Personal Data Security Leak. If you search for either of those phrases, it will take you to websites who will perform a corruption score on your data, and you'll be able to see quickly how much of your data is out in the world. And through either of these audits, the goal is for you to be able to take proactive steps, such as changing your passwords, putting security alerts on, understanding where you might want to allocate your time differently. So, oh, and I'm also seeing easy opt-out is less expensive than delete me. So thank you to the chat for that additional insight. So if I give you a few minutes to perform this data audit, I'd love to hear some feedback for those of you who are able to do so. What are the different sort of information or messages that you're seeing by how you're evaluating your data use? Have I Been Pwned was one, and then the second website was cybernews.com, personal data leak check. Okay. All right, so we're seeing some different responses here. We're working through some issues, right? We're using Norton VPN, lost me. Okay. Well, let's try this a different way. One way to do the app or the data evaluation is to look at how many apps you're using. I'm an iPhone user, so I go easily to settings, but if you're an Android user, you can look through your settings to see the types of apps that you use. Right? Or a second way to do a data audit is to evaluate the security of your data systems, either by looking for security alerts through your email, or secondarily by using one of the websites I've mentioned previously, Have I Been Pwned or Cyber News Personal Data Leak Check. Okay. I look forward to how you might engage this work. If you have any insights, please feel free to drop those in the chat as we move forward. And pwned is P-W-N-E-D. Okay. Thank you all so much. Let's move forward with some different ways to protect our data. For some of you, this might be very basic, and we might need to have another class that digs into deeper ways we can protect ourselves. But for some of you, this is probably important information. And so we feel it's necessary to go over all of this. So the first thing we want to sort of say to you as you tighten up your information security basics is to assume everything you say is public. I believe it was Emily Post who said that you should assume that anything you say will be posted on the company bulletin board, or others have said anything you say could be put on the front page of the New York Times. And so be careful when you're posting on social media such that you are backing up what you have to say with that public kind of sentiment. We also would encourage you to divide your devices, right? So have a work device versus a personal device. And I think Heather talked about this a little bit more detail, but those separation of those devices means that your in place of employment cannot search your personal device as long as you're not working through those things simultaneously. We also want you to keep your devices and software up to date, right? There are patches, there are different security measures that are put into place on the applications and systems we use. The more you're able to keep those up to date, the stronger you will be. Your password management should be extremely long, right? So have strong passwords that are many phrases, that have letters and numbers. Create as strong a passwords as you can. Keep them long, 14 letter characters or longer. Consider using a password manager. We say consider because we want you to be able to access your passwords and use them effectively. And some password managers are easier than others. Keep a especially strong password on your Wi-Fi, either your personal cell phone hotspot or your Wi-Fi for your home. Those actions will be able to protect you from individuals who would seek to gather your information across Wi-Fi signals. When possible, use two-factor authentication. And two-factor authentication is when you both use your password to log into a particular service, but then that service also sends you a push notification or another way of contacting you to ensure that it is you. And the more that you use a VPN is a good idea, right? A virtual private network protects your online activity. I believe that Apple has added a VPN to most of their phones. It's already available, but it's easy to download a VPN to stay on your phone, your laptop, or your iPad. And then, of course, back up your data. The more information that you have stored in a number of different locations, the stronger you will be. So if you're worried about cloud security, right, that's a time to keep your data on a hard drive, right, inside your house. Or if you're worried about the access available to your data based on the amount of time you spend in different applications, this gives you the opportunity to think about how you back up your data. So for example, one of the things that I did is I scrubbed my Facebook profile down to where there are no photos of my children. There are no personal photos to the extent that I can make it. And backing up that data that I had culled from Facebook was essential to being able to ensure I had all of that. Okay. And then, of course, we want you to be able to choose better tools. We want you to be able to recognize which apps or services prioritize your privacy, but know that that can change. So for right now, Heather and I are still recommending folks use Signal. We realize that Hegsdeath has perhaps given us some pause in whether or not to use Signal, but it is still the best messaging system for private messaging amongst friends and loved ones. It has end-to-end encryption, and it is less corrupted than something like WhatsApp or other private messaging services. And that's not to suggest that that message or that position of Signal won't change, but for right now, on this day of April 29th, 2025, we are still recommending Signal. And of course, as Heather has already said, understand that if you do not pay for the product, you are the product. So the reason we encourage you to do that data audit, and that clearly we need more time to be able to do that on our own, the goal in that kind of data audit is to understand how your information is being used, by whom, and for what purpose. And the more you audit your data and understand how it's being used, the stronger you will be. In a later slide, Heather will talk about how important it is that we engage in ongoing data protection. And that means looking for security alerts, engaging with our passwords and changing them frequently. All of these are actions that we need to take in order to create layers of protection around ourselves, which is the goal. We can't ever be perfect in controlling who has access to our data, but we can put layers of protection in place that will strongly strengthen the barriers around our data. With that, I hand it over to Heather.
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about some basics, making sure that you're logging in with individual passwords, that you're not using, for instance, Facebook to log into non-Facebook stuff, making sure that your passwords are good and long. The latest evidence is that pass keys, like long words that are meaningful to you but not meaningful to anybody else, those tend to be safer. But of course, you have so many accounts. That's why a password manager can be helpful. We want to spend a little bit of time talking through 3 brief examples for how to up your game. And if you're interested in us spending a little more time on sort of in-depth approaches to information security, do let us know in the chat so we can make sure that we have responsive webinar training. But there are a couple of things we want to share with you for how to up your date. One of them is up your game. One of them is to stay up to date, reading the news, being aware of executive orders that might influence or change the landscape, also being up to date and spending some time on doing an audit of your social media, etc., making sure that all of your privacy settings are the way that you want them. Something that somebody has recommended to me that I really love is to set aside time to manage your digital footprint, perhaps monthly or quarterly. I have done turning my birthday day into the admin day. So every couple of months or maybe every month, on the day of my birthday for that month, I go through and I do updated settings just to make sure that I'm taking particular care of my online footprint. We also want you to pinpoint particular risks and scenarios. So there are some really in-depth tools that we can share with you, some explainers about managing your risk at a protest. But a couple of things that we want to tell you is to consider your tech and to consider others. Now, your risk calculation is going to be different perhaps than others, but if you do bring your phone because you want to communicate with others, we're going to encourage you to remove Face ID or other biometric data and instead use a passcode. And that passcode should be as long as it can be. Also, make sure that you turn on auto lock, and that auto lock setting happens at the shortest amount of time possible. As we discussed earlier, be cautious about taking pictures and make sure that those pictures don't influence somebody else's risk calculation, right? So be careful about taking pictures of people's face or tattoos. I saw some people, or other identifying information. I saw some people talking about wearing masks in public. I think that that's a great public health move and also a potential way to manage surveillance. And then finally, assume your location is public. We know that government and other parties have used cell phone towers to triangulate the location of individuals at protests. So assume that your location is public. And if you're truly high risk, consider getting a burner phone. A burner phone is a prepaid phone that has less information on it, that's entirely separate for the purposes of connecting you to others without having all of the stuff on your normal phone. So that would be sort of a higher level escalation at a protest. For instance, we go to the next slide, Dr. Hahner. Yeah, at the border. This is a tricky one, and I'll start by saying we are not immigration attorneys, and so we want to be careful here. But the same sort of information security goes. Consider your technology, consider others. Think about how information security is connected. We would encourage you to remove Face ID, use the passcode auto lock or the equivalent, moving away from biometric data, which is less protected in practice than it is sort of like written into the law necessarily. We also want you to know your rights, and your rights are going to be dependent, at least in part on, that's not true. The exercise or performance or the experience of your rights may be different based upon your risk calculation. So we're hearing from some people that they wipe their phones or their social media or their sort of digital footprint entirely when they're entering and exiting the United States, and that works for them. We're also hearing from others that having too clean a digital footprint, it makes them more or less suspicious. And so our recommendation to you is to be as cautious and careful as you can. We don't have generic prescriptions because, again, risk calculation is different, but we would encourage you to do some of the basic digital security stuff. And if you've got more specific questions, consider being in contact with an immigration attorney or a collective of activists or organizers that have a little bit more connection in that space. And we also want to say that we know that this is changing on the daily. And so that's why having an ongoing updated sort of approach is going to matter. I think we had one more example. Yeah, so our final recommendation is to build your collective. Dr. Hahner and I have been the subject of some light doxing by alt-right trolls. One of the things that we did that was really powerful for us is we created a system where we monitored each other's footprint. And so when I was sort of like in the thick of it and I couldn't stand to hear people, comment on various parts of whatever my life, I would ask Dr. Hahner to look at my social media and let me know if something had gone sideways or something along those lines. You might offer an infosec party where something like 1,200 of you that were here today share some of this information with other people that you know. You could host a privacy reading group. There's a really great book called The Smart Girl's Guide to Privacy by Violet Blue. Maybe you read that and you work through some of the recommendations. And finally, of course, remember that Infosecurity is collective, so we must work collectively to keep ourselves safe. 2 final reminders. Your best influence continues to be local. I hope that you leave knowing that your voice matters, your impact matters, and there are ways to be safer. And our second key takeaway for today is that layers of protection are better than perfection, right? So do what you can when you can. Know that people have different risk calculations, and do what you can with the resources that are available and shift over time. When you know more, you can do more. So we're going to put up our exit ticket slide like we always do, which is just asking for you to sort of share some information. But I know that there are some questions in the chat. Dr. Hahner, do you want to facilitate those?
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and see if there are additional questions in the chat or in the main question and answer period. All right, good. So what's a VPN? A VPN is a virtual private network that allows you to browse with a little bit more security, because what it's doing is it's convincing the network that you are in a different location than you actually are. And so that allows you to browse with a little bit more ease. I use it almost all of the time. I'm on my cell phone or on my laptop. All right, what are some other questions that we've got? We need more in-depth training. Yeah. Implement a monthly digital footprint audit. I love that. Are we supposed to keep sharing on social media? Heather, what do you think?
So this is another sort of individual risk calculation. I will say, I generally believe that if we're thoughtful, we can use social media thoughtfully to organize. I just don't put all of my business on there. And I know that everything that I say is going to be public. And so I give the least amount of information to provide the most amount of impact that I can. And I also know that there are also sort of When we need to step up levels of trust, maybe I take it offline or I take it to a Signal chat.
Yeah. I'm also seeing people recommend Faraday bags. Sort of for like a black box for your phone when you go to different protests or events. I would also recommend those for protests. I'm seeing recommendation for the book Smart Girl's Guide to Privacy. That's a great book. It's awesome. Let's see, are there any other questions? Will this training be available? Yes, it'll be on YouTube very soon after tonight, if not immediately. Let's see. Is shutting off my phone at a protest good enough? I would say probably not. I would still want to black box that phone, but it depends on your level of risk. If you're just an average person going to the protest, turning your phone off is more than likely fine. But if you have heightened levels of risk, you might want to get a Faraday bag. You might want to have a burner phone that you take with you, so long as that burner phone has attorney's numbers in it, family numbers, members' numbers in it, and anything else you would need to actually navigate your way to and from the protest space. Okay. All right. Is there anything else? I think that's about it. Thank you all so much. This has been wonderful and we're so grateful.
Amazing. Dr. Hahner, Dr. Woods, thank you so much for the wealth of knowledge, the wealth of wisdom. Thank you everyone for your energy in the chat. And to keep us grounded and oriented in this, every one of you, if you have brought another friend, turned them into movement, brought them into an action, brought them out into the street, you are an organizer. And these tools are for organizers. So we keep each other safe. The fascists in charge, the Trump regime, wants us to feel defeated, wants us to be terrified and pull back into our own worlds and not fight back. These tools are here for us to strengthen our organizing and fight forward and build the feminist future we all want. So we'll see y'all in the streets. May Day is coming up. May Day is on Thursday. We have over 1,000 actions in not almost every city, in every state, in many cities across the country. Maydaystrong.org to find an action near you. If you are walking out, if you're one of the tens of thousands of people who told us you're walking out on May Day, walk out. Find community, do your thing. If you want to find an action, maydaystrong.org or womensmarch.com and click on the map. And finally, we'll have more information coming out. It's on socials now, but on tomorrow on email about Trump's military parade and the greatest shit show on earth and how we can turn some clowns up and out and resist with humor and joy. That was a lot of information. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Hahner, Dr. Woods. We'll see you in a month. Good night.